meal here, but I'll tell you what, we've got a brand new segment this year called Market Spotlights, where we're talking about different markets and use cases and verticals in the AV industry. And one of the places where people ask some of the most questions is in the world of critical infrastructure and data centers. And the person who introduced me to that market is the same guy who's going to have that conversation today with us, Mr. Dan Gundry. Dan, it's an annual tradition. Of course we had to have you back on.
We absolutely do, and thank you so much for having me. And sorry, Sam. Thank you.
Look, Sam's interviewed you probably like 4 or 5 times now, so she knows. This is your MO, right? We're just bombastic people.
100%.
Look, Dan, I'm curious. Let's start at a high level, right? Obviously, a lot of folks in here in the AV industry know the AV industry really well. Manufacturers, service providers, integrators, installers, folks like that. We kind of know our lane a little bit, but the ask from some of the top brass is, hey, how do we find new places to serve, new markets, new use cases? One of those is the world of data centers and critical infrastructure. Just give us a high-level overview. What are some of the defining characteristics maybe of that industry specifically?
Yeah, so data centers is a really explosive industry across the board. A lot of people don't understand what data centers are, and they don't understand the market per se. Kind of a little bit like control rooms, right? We know control rooms, but we're kind of scared about it a little bit. And they kind of come together in this conversation. So the data center industry represents about $500 billion globally and growing at a rate of over 15% year over year. That's incredible level of growth. Over 1,000 hyperscale data centers, and then probably another 4,000 other kind of data centers. And to kind of speak to the nerd population out there, according to Back to the Future, it takes 1.21 gigawatts to travel back in time, but the data center industry requires 35 times that for power, and that gets to the heart of the control room opportunity, the mission critical opportunity in control rooms in data centers, because it's not just about the data center itself, but it's about the power that they require for all of that computing. So you have data center adjacent opportunities in power plants primarily.
Well, Dan, look, one of the places you talked about where AV's point of entry into a lot of these places is the data center. The control room. And whether it's you guys, whether it's your partners like Winstead, whether it's a lot of great integrators, or service providers in the industry, you see a lot of those conversations happening around control rooms. Talk a little bit about how sort of that control room fits primarily into this world.
Well, before we start talking about the control room, there's opportunities for the standard Pro AV market in there, right? Digital signage, wayfinding, paging and mass communications, general conferencing spaces. So don't dismiss the normal stuff that an AV integrator or this community would do on a regular basis. But when we start talking about mission critical, it is slightly different. Every data center is going to have a SOC, meaning a security operations center, and a NOC, a network operations center. May not look like a SOC that would look like for a global security operations center, may only have 1 or 2 desks. They may not even call it that space, they may call it something different, but they all have something that they use that monitors what's going on in the space, whether that be physical security. I want to make sure that bad actors are not coming into the space and doing bad things with the data that's being pumped through there, or network operations, which is I need to make sure that doesn't go down because I need my Snapchat, right? So those are some of those requirements. So those spaces are designed through a control room lens, not through an AV lens, right? Mission criticality is important. Redundancy, resiliency, cybersecurity becomes really important. We want to make sure that those systems perform the way that those IT and OT-centric companies require them to.
Well, look, you mentioned things like compliance, security, and you'll hear the words air-gapped and things like that. Obviously, we're sort of familiar with that as an industry, but that's a whole different conversation. But what it does bring up is that, look, IT's a stakeholder, the AV folks are stakeholders, my facilities operations manager is stakeholder, security. Who are some of those people in that buying channel really that have influence typically in that decision when we talk about data center critical infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above have a say and influence on that. The question really is who is the decision maker and where do you start in terms of discovery and conversations? And it depends on where you're coming in. If it's an established data center, then you're going to go after operations. So you're going to talk to, and maybe it's security if it's the security manager, or maybe it's operations if it's going to be a network operations center. If it's greenfield new construction, there are construction management and development firms that are specifically building those out. So seek them out. There are architectural and engineering firms that are specifically designing these spaces. Seek them out in the industry as well. I think those are kind of 2 of those key points. It's not necessarily one versus the other, but most of the time it's going to be owned within the IT circle, or it's going to be owned if it's a security operations center by the security systems manager or that team.
Well, Dan, last question for you here before we wrap. we talk a lot about compliance and security across a number of different industries. There are obviously standards from a hardware manufacturer standpoint, things like BAA, TAA that are in consideration in this industry. What are some of the other compliances and standards typically that you see from a service provider or manufacturer standpoint?
Yeah, so good control room practices starts and stops with some IEC standards that are out there. Manufacturers and some integrators are going to want to have ISO 27K. That puts the onus on us as manufacturers and select integrators to make sure that we're doing all the things to make sure that we're protecting our end users on the cybersecurity, the product security side. You want to seek out manufacturers that are taking security into consideration from day one, so secure by default to secure by design concept. In terms of compliance, you mentioned BAA, which is Buy America Act. TA is the Trade Agreement Act. That basically says where my stuff is manufactured, and a lot of the corporate organizations, BAA and TAA were typically government standards. So Department of Transportation, Defense, military, they were required to purchase within those guidelines. But a lot of corporate, a lot of electrical utilities, a lot of other organizations are starting to see the value in making sure that the stuff is made in friendly countries. And so TAA and BAA become really important from a criteria in terms of your products that you're specifying into those jobs.
Yeah, and that's the final word right there. Dan, I mean, we got to have you on the show more. I mean, we already have you on once, sometimes twice a year, and you are a knowledge machine. And of course, naturally, we ran over time as sort of is our typical cadence. But Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Always a pleasure.